31 years old and still unmarried.
Selmira laughed loudly as crystal glasses clinked around the ballroom.
At this point, father should simply donate Eudora to a convent. Oh dear.
Soft laughter spread across the table. Eudora lowered her eyes quietly while pretending not to hear the humiliation. Then Callista suddenly stood up with excitement sparkling across her face.
Oh, Eudora, I nearly forgot. You still have not admired my engagement
She
ring
said
properly.
dramatically. The youngest sister walked proudly across the ballroom and stretched her hand directly before Eudora's face beneath the chandelier light. A massive diamond sparkled on her finger, surrounded by tiny sapphires. Several guests gasped immediately.
Phineas spent nearly £5,000 on it. My goodness, look at that diamond.
Though I suppose engagement rings are rather unfamiliar to you, dear sister.
It is very beautiful, Callista.
Do not lose hope, Eudora. Perhaps someday a lonely old widower may still choose you.
Even more laughter filled the ballroom. Selmira nearly choked on her wine, laughing, while Lord Cedric slowly raised his glass.
All my daughters brought honor to this family,
He declared coldly. Then his eyes shifted toward Eudora.
except one.
The ballroom suddenly fell silent. Eudora felt humiliation burn across her face as every guest turned toward her. And just as she slowly pushed back her chair to leave the room, the enormous
Grace,
ballroom
Duke
doors
Alaric
burst
Ravenshade.
open. A royal servant's voice thundered across the estate. His Grace, Duke Alaric Ravenshade. The entire ballroom froze. But before we continue, if you enjoy emotional royal dramas filled with betrayal, heartbreak, jealousy, and powerful revenge, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel.
And if you truly want to support the channel, you can use super thanks below. Your support helps us continue creating these unforgettable stories for you every single day. Now,
Let us so begin.
You are not alone.
Eudora Walecrest stood near the long dining table, balancing a silver tray filled with warm blackberry tarts, while laughter echoed through the drawing room behind her. The scent of roasted duck, buttered potatoes, and cinnamon wine drifted through the crowded halls as servants hurried between guests wrapped in velvet coats and pearl-covered gowns. Nobody noticed the eldest daughter of the house carrying empty glasses, except to ask her for something.
Miss Walecrest.
More tea, Miss Walecrest?
More tea, please.
The old countess, asking the question, did not even realize she was speaking to the daughter of the manor
Yes, though it
instead
is
of a servant.
unfortunate she never
Eudora
married.
smiled gently and poured the tea anyway. Across the room, Selmira sat proudly beside Lady Rowena, discussing silk fabrics recently imported from Paris, while Callista laughed loudly over a story involving a young officer
You should have seen the
desperate to
young
court
officer
her.
following me through the
Their
gardens
expensive
earlier.
jewelry reflected
The poor man
against the
could barely
candlelight,
speak properly.
hanging from the crystal chandeliers above.
Beauty makes men foolish,
Eudora
darling.
listened quietly while standing near the wall, her plain dark blue gown making her nearly invisible among the brighter colors surrounding her. 3 years earlier, she would have been seated beside her sisters. 3 years earlier, men had asked for introductions during every social gathering. Now, people looked past her, as though she had slowly faded into the wallpaper of the estate itself. The Walecrest Manor stood as one of the grandest aristocratic homes in Northumberland, with towering marble fireplaces, endless corridors lined with golden portraits, and polished black staircases curving beneath painted ceilings. Lord Cedric guarded the family reputation with almost religious obsession. Every dinner, every guest, every marriage discussion inside the manor revolved around status, and Eudora had become the family's greatest disappointment. At 31 years old, she remained unmarried. In Victorian society, that truth followed her everywhere. During church visits, women lowered their voices the moment she passed. Younger girls secretly studied her with nervous pity, as though she represented a terrible future waiting for them if they failed to marry in time. Older women were crueler.
She was
beautiful once, Eudora overheard one woman whisper after Sunday service. It is sad what age does to a woman's chances, another replied quietly.
At 31,
Eudora continued
highly
walking
unlikely.
as though she had heard nothing. Pain had become something she carried silently. That afternoon, while guests continued drinking wine inside the drawing room, Eudora slipped into the kitchen where the atmosphere felt warmer and kinder. Fresh bread cooled beside the windows, while cooks stirred thick onion soup inside steaming iron pots. Little Clara, the youngest daughter of one of the maids, sat crying softly near the corner after burning her hand helping polish serving trays. Eudora immediately knelt beside her. "Oh, sweetheart, let me see." The child sniffled, while Eudora wrapped the small red hand carefully with cool cloth soaked in lavender water. The frightened girl slowly calmed as Eudora brushed curls away from her face and handed her a sugared biscuit stolen from the dessert tray. "Do not tell the cook," Eudora whispered gently. The child giggled. Moments like that were the only times Eudora still felt useful inside the manor. Lady Rowena entered the kitchen minutes later, elegant as always, in dark emerald silk trimmed with pearls. Her sharp eyes immediately landed on Eudora, crouched beside the child.
There you are. Guests are asking for you.
Eudora stood quickly.
I was helping Clara.
Yes, well, try not to disappear during gatherings. People already ask enough questions.
The words were calm, but the shame behind them stung deeply. Lady Rowena never openly insulted her eldest daughter, yet disappointment followed every glance she gave Eudora in public. That evening, Lord Cedric hosted several wealthy guests in his study while discussing future business alliances. Eudora passed the partially open door, carrying fresh glasses, when she heard her father speaking.
Selmira's marriage will strengthen our position considerably. A successful match matters greatly for families like ours.
And your eldest daughter?
Another gentleman asked carefully. A brief silence followed.
We no longer discuss unrealistic expectations.
Lord Cedric replied coldly. Eudora stopped walking. For several seconds she stood frozen in the dim hallway, staring down at the silver tray trembling lightly in her hands. Then she continued forward before anyone noticed her listening. Late that night, while rain tapped softly against the manor windows, preparations quietly began downstairs for Selmira's engagement celebration. Rolls of imported fabric arrived from London. Servants carried flower arrangements through the corridors, while musicians discussed performances beside the ballroom entrance. From the top staircase, Eudora watched everything silently as excitement filled the house around her. Another sister was preparing to leave her behind.
The Valecrest estate transformed completely during the weeks leading to Selmira's engagement celebration. Carriages arrived daily, carrying boxes wrapped in velvet cloth, silver candle holders from London, imported roses from France, and enormous glass vases painted with gold edges. The ballroom smelled constantly of fresh lilies and melted candle wax, while servants rushed through corridors carrying folded silk tablecloths and trays of polished crystal glasses. Every conversation inside the manor revolved around Selmira. Lady Rowena spent entire afternoons discussing guest lists and gown fittings, while Lord Cedric proudly boasted about Viscount Hadrian Morell's family name to every visitor willing to listen. Musicians arrived 2 days before the celebration and practiced waltzes late into the evening beneath the painted ceilings of the ballroom. Meanwhile, Eudora worked quietly behind everything. She supervised flower arrangements, helped organize guest rooms, checked seating placements, and calmed nervous servants terrified of making mistakes before important nobles. By the morning of the celebration, exhaustion weighed heavily beneath her eyes, yet nobody thanked her once. Selmira swept through the manor like royalty already crowned. Her engagement gown, made from pale gold satin imported from Paris, shimmered whenever she moved through candlelight. Diamond earrings rested against her neck, while maids adjusted her long gloves every few minutes.
You missed a ribbon near the west staircase.
Selmira complained carelessly while passing Eudora in the corridor.
Honestly, if you cannot manage decorations properly, perhaps you should leave them to professionals.
Eudora quietly fixed the ribbon herself. By evening, the estate overflowed with guests. Noblewomen in embroidered gowns glided through the ballroom, carrying crystal wine glasses, while gentlemen discussed politics beside the fireplaces. Platters of roasted pheasant, glazed carrots, buttered potatoes, smoked salmon, and sugared pastries covered the dining tables beneath golden candlelight. Eudora stood near the musicians, arranging fresh glasses, when an elderly duchess approached her kindly.
You are Lord Cedric's eldest daughter, are you not? Such a lovely face. Tell me, child, when shall we celebrate your engagement?
The question struck like a needle beneath her ribs. Before Eudora could answer politely, another woman nearby sighed softly.
At her age, good matches become difficult.
A third added in a whisper, clearly meant to be heard.
One must admire her composure. Excuse me.
Eudora forced a smile and excused herself. The humiliation worsened later during dinner. Selmira sat proudly beside Viscount Hadrian while guests toasted their future together. Hadrian smiled charmingly through the evening, though Eudora noticed his hands trembling slightly whenever servants refilled his wineglass. Twice she overheard him quietly asking another gentleman about horse racing results and unpaid debts. The worry in his voice unsettled her, but Selmira noticed nothing except admiration. When dessert arrived, Lady Rowena instructed Eudora to help distribute plates personally among the guests because several servants had become overwhelmed.
As Eudora placed lemon cakes before the table, Selmira laughed loudly beside her fiancé.
Careful, sister.
She teased.
Continue serving guests this well. People may mistake you for household staff.
Several guests laughed awkwardly. Eudora lowered her eyes and continued walking. Then Selmira added even louder,
Though perhaps managing dinners is the closest Eudora shall come to running a household of her own.
This time the laughter spread wider across the ballroom. Lady Rowena immediately leaned toward Eudora with a tight smile frozen on her face.
Smile. Do not embarrass the family by appearing sensitive.
Eudora nodded silently, while shame burned across her chest. Hours later, after the guests departed and the music finally ended, Eudora locked herself inside her bedroom. The silence there felt unbearable after an evening filled with forced smiles and humiliation. She sat at her vanity, still wearing the same dark blue gown, while tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. A soft knock came at the door. Mara entered, carrying warm milk, sweetened with honey. "I thought you might not sleep tonight," the maid said gently. Eudora wiped her face quickly. "I am being foolish." "No, you are being hurt."
Tonight.
The kindness in those
I am
words
being
nearly made
foolish.
Eudora cry again.
No, you are being hurt.
The wedding took place 3 weeks later beneath grey winter skies. Crowds gathered outside the church, watching Selmira step into her carriage, wrapped in white fur and lace, while Lord Cedric smiled proudly before society. Eudora stood near the stone steps, holding her gloves tightly against the cold. As the carriage rolled away, carrying Selmira towards her new life, excitement filled everyone around her. But inside Eudora, something emptier settled quietly into place. For the first time, she no longer felt like part of the family she lived among.
Long before silence settled permanently inside Eudora Valecrest, there had once been laughter. At 22, she moved through the gardens of the Valecrest estate with warmth in her eyes and excitement in her voice. She played piano in the evenings beside open windows, while summer air carried the scent of roses through the manor halls. During dinners, she spoke freely about poetry, philosophy, and politics, often surprising guests with her intelligence. That was before Thomas Everwin entered her life. Thomas first arrived at the estate, accompanying a professor invited by Lord Cedric for business discussions regarding agricultural investments. Unlike the nobleman Eudora usually met, Thomas carried no arrogance around him. He spoke calmly, listened carefully, and treated every servant with quiet respect. Their first conversation lasted nearly an hour beside the library fireplace. By the second week, they were exchanging books. By the third, Eudora found herself waiting each afternoon for his visits without admitting why. Thomas understood parts of her nobody else noticed. While society cared only about beauty and marriage prospects, he admired her thoughts, her curiosity, and the softness hidden beneath her composed manners. They spent long afternoons walking near the lakeside, discussing literature while fallen leaves drifted across the water. Sometimes he played violin softly inside the music room, while Eudora accompanied him on piano. For the first time, she felt chosen for who she truly was. Even Mara noticed the difference. "You smile again," the maid whispered once while helping Eudora prepare for dinner. Eudora blushed immediately. But happiness inside the Valecrest estate never lasted long. One rainy evening, Lord Cedric entered the library unexpectedly and found Thomas and Eudora seated closely together beside the fireplace. Thomas had been reading poetry aloud, while Eudora listened with quiet admiration written across her face. The atmosphere changed instantly. Lord Cedric's expression darkened with fury. Later that night, his voice thundered through the study, loud enough for servants to hear from the corridor.
"You dared approach my daughter, knowing you possess neither title nor fortune!"
Thomas stood straight, despite the humiliation.
Love her sincerely. That means nothing.
Lord Cedric snapped coldly.
Love does not preserve noble families.
Father, please listen to me.
Eudora begged her father to listen, but he refused completely. Lady Rowena supported the separation quietly, insisting society would destroy the Valecrest reputation if their eldest daughter married beneath aristocratic expectations. Thomas was ordered to leave the estate immediately. The next morning, Eudora found him waiting near the garden gate beneath heavy rain. His suitcase rested beside the carriage wheels, while water soaked through his dark coat. "I will return for you," he promised, while holding her trembling hands tightly, "no matter how long it takes." Eudora cried after the carriage disappeared beyond the hills. For months she waited endlessly for letters. Then winter arrived, carrying devastating news. Thomas had died abroad after falling seriously ill during travel. Eudora remembered the exact moment Mara handed her the letter. The teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered across the floor, while the world around her suddenly felt distant and unreal. She locked herself inside her bedroom for days afterwards, refusing food, conversation, or sunlight. Something inside her never recovered completely. The cheerful young woman who once laughed beside piano music slowly disappeared after that winter. Years later, the manor prepared for another engagement. Odette stood before the mirror while servants adjusted pearls into her dark hair before dinner. Her engagement to Lord Lucien Harremont had become the newest source of pride for the family. Lucien possessed political influence, enormous estates, and growing importance within Parliament. At dinner, Odette reached for Eudora's hand gently enough for guests nearby to notice.
You must not feel discouraged, dear sister. Marriage is not the only purpose in life.
The sympathy in her voice felt rehearsed. Several guests lowered their eyes awkwardly. Eudora smiled politely. Of course. Across the table, Lucien barely looked at his fiancée while discussing trade policies with Lord Cedric. Throughout the evening, his attention remained fixed on political matters instead of Odette herself. Later that night, Eudora passed the drawing room and overheard Odette speaking quietly. You missed supper entirely yesterday, Odette complained softly.
I had meetings,
he answered without emotion.
You
always have meetings. And you always seek unnecessary reassurance. The coldness in his voice silenced the room. Eudora walked away before hearing more. For the first time, she noticed uncertainty beginning to appear beneath Odette's perfect smile.
Callista Veilcrest had grown up hearing compliments so constantly that she no longer noticed when she insulted people. From childhood, guests praised her beauty openly before she even entered rooms. By 19, she moved through the Veilcrest estate with the confidence of someone who believed admiration belonged to her naturally. Servants rushed whenever she called, tailors travelled from London for her fittings, and every gathering revolved around her laughter. When wealthy industrial heir Phineas Whitcomb proposed during a private dinner in London, Callista returned home displaying her diamond ring like a royal trophy.
He owns factories in 3 cities,
she announced proudly, while sitting beside the fireplace surrounded by guests. Lord Cedric looked deeply satisfied hearing those words. Within days, the estate exploded into preparation once again. Workers arrived carrying flower arches, imported wines, crates of silver decorations, and enormous rolls of cream-colored silk meant to transform the ballroom's ceiling. The kitchens became unbearably hot from endless baking, while the scent of vanilla cakes, roasted meats, cinnamon pastries, and sweet wine drifted constantly through the halls. Lady Rowena placed nearly all responsibility onto Eudora.
The servants require supervision, Eudora.
She explained calmly over breakfast. You are organized enough for such tasks.
You are organized enough for
sunrise
such
until
tasks.
late evening.
Yes,
Eudora
Mother, I shall
barely
handle
rested.
everything.
She
See
inspected
that you
guest
do.
rooms, directed florists, corrected seating arrangements, counted silverware, and settled arguments between exhausted kitchen workers. Her hands ached constantly, while her sisters wandered through the manor, discussing gowns and jewels. Honestly, Eudora, laughed Callista one afternoon while watching her carry fabric samples across the corridor.
Honestly, Eudora, you manage this household more seriously than Mother.
Selmira smirked beside her wineglass.
Perhaps she has accepted her future at last.
Odette covered her smile behind a fan. Eudora continued walking without answering. 2 days before the engagement celebration, a noblewoman visiting from Bath entered the ballroom when Eudora adjusted candles beside the tables.
You there, please tell Lady Veilcrest the flower arrangements appear uneven.
Eudora straightened politely. Before she could explain, Callista burst into laughter nearby.
Do not worry, my sister practically runs the household already.
Several people laughed softly. The noblewoman looked embarrassed after realizing her mistake, but Callista continued smiling proudly instead of correcting the humiliation. That evening, Eudora escaped briefly into the servants' corridor behind the kitchens, desperate for silence away from the endless mockery. As she passed the pantry entrance, she overheard 2 maids speaking quietly. Miss Eudora deserves far better than this family gives her, one whispered. She is the only one who thanks us, another replied. The others barely notice we exist. Eudora stopped walking. For several seconds she stood silently listening, while emotion tightened painfully inside her chest. Even servants saw the cruelty her own family ignored. Later that night, while carrying fresh linens upstairs, she paused outside Lord Cedric's study after hearing her name spoken inside.
Once Callista marries, it may be best for Eudora to relocate permanently to Aunt Theodora's countryside property.
Lady Rowena sighed softly.
People have begun asking questions.
She embarrasses the family simply by remaining here unmarried.
The words hollowed something inside her. During the engagement dinner, hundreds of candles illuminated the ballroom, while musicians played softly beside the marble staircase. Guests filled their plates with roast duck glazed in honey, creamy potatoes, buttered carrots, oysters served on silver trays, and warm berry pastries dusted with sugar. Callista raised her wineglass proudly beside Phineas.
2 successful marriages.
She announced brightly.
Perhaps
Selmira
not for
laughed
everyone.
immediately. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Odette tilted her head toward Eudora with false sympathy.
Do not look so miserable, sister. Some women simply are not destined.
Even Phineas smiled awkwardly. Eudora felt humiliation burn through her body, while laughter spread around the table again. Without speaking, she stood and walked out of the ballroom. Cold rain struck her skin the moment she stepped outside into the dark gardens. Her breathing became uneven as tears mixed with rainwater across her cheeks. She pressed trembling hands against her mouth, trying desperately to remain quiet beneath the storm. Then suddenly, through the sound of rain, carriage wheels echoed loudly across the front driveway of the estate. Eudora slowly lifted her head toward the entrance gates.
Across England, the name Alaric Ravenshade carried the kind of power that made men lower their voices during conversation. His estate stretched across counties filled with forests, horse farms, factories, and shipping ports that brought enormous wealth into the Ravenshade family every month. Politicians requested his support carefully. Bankers treated him with caution. Even noble families older than his own respected the influence he carried inside Parliament and London society. At 37 years old, Duke Alaric Ravenshade had become the wealthiest duke in England, yet people feared him almost as much as they admired him. Inside Ravenshade Manor, silence followed him constantly. The enormous estate overlooking black cliffs near the northern coast felt more like a fortress than a home. Dark wood halls, towering fireplaces, and endless portraits lined the mansion, while servants moved carefully through corridors, avoiding unnecessary conversation whenever the duke walked past. Alaric rarely smiled anymore. Most evenings, he sat alone inside his private study, surrounded by ledgers, business documents, and untouched glasses of whiskey, while rain battered against the tall windows overlooking the sea. Invitations to balls, dinners, and royal gatherings piled unopened across his desk. Romance no longer interested him. Years earlier, London society had celebrated his relationship with Lady Vivian Ashbourne like a fairy tale. Vivian possessed extraordinary beauty that captivated every ballroom she entered. Men admired her openly, while women copied her gowns and hairstyles. Beside Alaric, she appeared destined to become one of the most admired duchesses in England. At first, Alaric truly believed she loved him. He gifted her rare jewels, financed repairs to her family estate, and spoke openly about marriage before aristocratic society. Newspapers constantly praised the future union between Ravenshade wealth and Ashbourne beauty. But beneath Vivian's graceful smiles lived ambition colder than love. Months before their official engagement announcement, Alaric discovered letters hidden inside her writing desk, revealing a secret relationship with another nobleman, Lord Damien Whitmore. The affair had continued for nearly a year, while Vivian publicly pretended devotion to the Duke. The betrayal itself wounded him deeply. The humiliation afterward destroyed something inside him completely. Rumors spread across London within days. Noble women whispered behind fans during operas, while gentlemen exchanged quiet jokes at private clubs. People pitied the powerful duke, fooled by a beautiful woman chasing his fortune. What hurt most was discovering Vivian never denied it privately.
You were security, Alaric.
She told him coldly during their final confrontation.
Damien was passion.
After everything
Alaric
I gave
never
you.
forgot those words. Afterward, he withdrew emotionally from society almost entirely. Women continued pursuing him constantly, but he no longer trusted charm, beauty, or affection offered too easily. At royal banquets, ambitious mothers pushed their daughters toward him desperately, while young noble women laughed too loudly around him, hoping for attention. He responded with polite distance every time. Many women called him cold. Others called him heartless. The truth was simpler. Alaric no longer believed love existed without selfishness hiding behind it. One snowy evening, Dowager Duchess Isolde Ravenshade entered his study carrying a silver tray with roasted lamb, buttered bread, and steaming black tea, after noticing he had skipped supper again.
You cannot spend your life hiding from people forever,
she said quietly, while setting the tray beside the fireplace. Alaric continued reading correspondence without looking up.
I am not hiding.
You have attended 3 social events in 2 years.
I attended enough for a lifetime before that.
Isolde studied her son carefully. The sharpness in his face had hardened over the years, while exhaustion lingered constantly beneath his eyes.
She betrayed you, but not every woman is Lady Vivienne.
Alaric finally looked toward the rain-covered windows.
Most are better at hiding it.
The Dowager Duchess sighed sadly. More than anything, she feared her son would die emotionally alone inside the enormous Ravenshade estate, surrounded only by wealth and bitterness. Days later, a formal invitation arrived from Lord Cedric Valecrest, requesting Alaric's presence at Callista Valecrest's engagement celebration. Under ordinary circumstances, he would have ignored it like countless others, but Lord Cedric possessed growing influence among several industrial investors connected to Ravenshade shipping routes. Refusing entirely could create unnecessary tension. Alaric stared at the invitation for several long moments before finally placing it aside. "You intend to go?"
You intend to
Bernard
attend the
Holomere,
celebration,
his longtime
Your Grace?
butler, asked carefully.
For one evening.
"For one
Nothing
evening,"
more.
Alaric replied flatly. "Nothing more." The night of the celebration arrived wrapped in cold rain and heavy fog. Servants fastened Alaric's dark coat, while horses stomped impatiently outside the estate entrance. Inside the carriage, silence surrounded him, except for the steady sound of wheels crushing wet gravel roads. As the journey continued through the countryside, distant lights from the Valecrest estate slowly appeared ahead through the rain. Alaric leaned back against the carriage seat without emotion. He expected another ballroom filled with people pretending affection while chasing status and wealth. Nothing more.
The moment Duke Alaric Ravenshade entered the Valecrest ballroom, the atmosphere changed completely. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Music softened uncertainly, while noblewomen straightened their shoulders and adjusted gloves beneath the candlelight. Mothers immediately pulled daughters closer, whispering desperate instructions behind decorated fans. "Stand properly. Smile. Do not appear nervous." The ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers, polished marble floors, and towering flower arrangements wrapped around white pillars. Servants moved carefully between guests, carrying silver trays filled with champagne, sugared strawberries, roasted pheasant, and delicate pastries layered with cream. At the center of the room, Callista's diamond ring sparkled brightly as she laughed beside Phineas Whitcomb. But even her engagement became secondary the moment Alaric appeared. Lord Cedric hurried forward personally to greet him, while Lady Rowena's entire posture changed with excitement. Across the ballroom, Lady Vivienne Ashbourne slowly lowered her wineglass, confidence immediately returning to her expression. Vivienne wore deep crimson silk that evening, her dark curls carefully arranged beneath diamond pins. She moved closer through the crowd without hesitation, clearly expecting Alaric's attention to return eventually. Instead, Alaric greeted her with nothing more than polite indifference. Vivienne's smile tightened almost invisibly. Several young noblewomen attempted conversation afterwards, laughing too loudly at ordinary remarks while complimenting Ravenshade estates and his influence in Parliament. Alaric answered courteously, but emotionally distant, his attention wandering across the ballroom rather than settling on any face around him. Then a loud crash interrupted the music. A frightened servant girl carrying champagne had stumbled beside one of the tables. Crystal glasses shattered across the floor, while pale liquid spread over expensive carpets. The young girl froze in horror as nearby guests stepped backward in annoyance. "How careless!" one woman muttered sharply. The servant's hands trembled violently as she bent down, trying to gather broken glass. Before anyone else moved, Eudora quietly knelt beside her. "It is all right," she whispered gently. "You are bleeding." Ignoring her own gown soaking against spilled wine, Eudora removed a clean handkerchief and carefully wrapped the servant's cut finger while speaking softly enough to calm her panic. Alaric watched the scene from across the room without blinking. Something twisted unexpectedly inside his chest. Vivienne would have mocked the girl publicly for embarrassing her. Eudora protected her instead. For the remainder of the evening, Alaric found himself observing her constantly. He noticed how she remained near the edges of conversations while her sisters occupied attention easily. He noticed servants smiling gratefully whenever she spoke to them. Most painfully, he noticed how cruelly her own family treated her without shame. Selmira especially seemed to enjoy humiliating her.
During supper, while guests enjoyed roasted duck glazed with honey and bowls of creamy potato soup, Selmira lifted her wineglass dramatically.
To Callista, the final daughter bringing honor through marriage.
Several guests chuckled politely. Then her eyes shifted toward Eudora.
Though perhaps miracles still await our eldest sister someday.
Laughter spread softly around the table. Eudora lowered her gaze toward her untouched plate. Alaric did not laugh. Instead, he pushed back his chair slowly and stood. The movement alone silenced nearby conversation. Without hesitation, he crossed the ballroom directly toward Eudora, while every eye followed him in confusion. Even Lady Vivian stared openly now. Eudora looked up in visible shock when Alaric stopped before her chair.
Miss Valacrest, would you honor me with a dance?
The entire ballroom froze. For a moment, Eudora can barely breathe. Heat rushed painfully into her face, while dozens of stunned guests watched silently around them. Her voice nearly failed. Of course, Your Grace. Her trembling fingers rested carefully in his hand. As the orchestra began another waltz, Alaric guided her gently across the polished floor beneath the chandeliers. Eudora moved nervously at first, clearly overwhelmed by the attention surrounding them.
You seem uncomfortable.
I am unaccustomed to becoming the center of a ballroom.
A faint smile almost touched his expression. Unlike every woman surrounding him all evening, Eudora never once mentioned his wealth, title, or influence. Instead, she spoke honestly about books, music, and how exhausting large gatherings felt after too many hours. The simplicity of her answers unsettled him more than practiced charm ever could. Around them, whispers spread rapidly between guests. Why her? He has ignored every noblewoman in London. Did you see Vivian's face? By the time the dance ended, society had already begun talking.
After the dance at Callista's engagement celebration, Duke Alaric Ravenshade began appearing at the Valecrest estate so frequently that servants started preparing his preferred tea before his carriage even reached the front gates. At first, society treated the visits like harmless curiosity. Then, newspapers in London began printing subtle remarks about the mysterious attention the Duke seemed to be giving Lord Cedric's unmarried eldest daughter. Gossip spread through drawing rooms, opera halls, and church gatherings with astonishing speed.
Perhaps Ravenshade pities her. No powerful man visits a woman repeatedly without intention. Surely he cannot truly admire Miss Valecrest.
Inside the manor, everything changed. Lord Cedric suddenly invited Eudora to sit nearer important guests during supper. He asked her opinion during conversations whenever Alaric visited, and introduced her proudly before wealthy businessmen as though he had always valued her presence. Lady Rowena transformed even more dramatically. Expensive gowns arrived from London almost weekly now. Emerald silk, pale silver satin, and lace gloves trimmed with pearls filled Eudora's wardrobe, while her mother hovered around her constantly before gatherings. "You must wear your hair differently," Lady Rowena insisted one afternoon, adjusting a necklace around Eudora's throat. "The Duke notices elegance." Eudora barely recognized the strange affection in her mother's behavior, but her sisters noticed it immediately, and they hated it. Selmira's bitterness worsened after discovering Viscount Hadrian had secretly sold several pieces of her jewelry to repay gambling debts. Their marriage, once displayed proudly before society, had become filled with shouting behind closed doors and nights spent waiting for him to return home from gambling clubs. Odette's loneliness deepened quietly. Lord Lucian rarely slept at their estate anymore, spending most evenings buried in political meetings while treating his wife more like decoration than companionship. Meanwhile, Callista's glamorous marriage quickly darkened after the wedding. Phineas Whitcomb controlled everything she wore, where she traveled, and whom she visited. The man who once showered her with compliments now criticized her constantly whenever guests departed. Yet none of the sisters blamed their husbands. They blamed Eudora. One afternoon, Selmira sat angrily inside the drawing room, twisting her wineglass between nervous fingers. She manipulated him, she muttered bitterly. No powerful man suddenly notices a woman like Eudora without reason. Odette remained quieter, but no less resentful. She makes herself appear innocent. Men enjoy rescuing women they pity. Callista slammed her teacup onto the table. She enjoys humiliating us now. Their jealousy slowly poisoned every conversation inside the manor. Soon, rumors began spreading through society that Eudora had emotionally trapped Alaric using vulnerability and false modesty. Selmira encouraged the gossip privately while pretending innocence publicly. Odette went further. During a dinner gathering in London, she secretly arranged for Lady Vivian Ashbourne to attend, knowing the woman still desired Alaric's attention desperately. Vivian arrived wearing black velvet and diamonds that glittered beneath candlelight. Throughout the evening she laughed softly beside Alaric, touching his arm occasionally while speaking about old memories they once shared. Eudora watched quietly from across the room, feeling something painful tighten inside her chest. Then Vivian leaned closer toward Alaric and murmured, "You were happier before becoming so serious." Alaric's expression hardened instantly. "No, I was simply more foolish." The rejection silenced Vivian completely.
You were happier before becoming so
Later
serious.
that evening, Alaric returned unexpectedly to the Valecrest estate after realizing he had forgotten important documents in the study. As he walked through the corridor near the drawing room, angry voices stopped him. Selmira's voice carried clearly through the partially open door.
She
is embarrassing herself chasing him. Callista laughed sharply. At her age, she would cling to any wealthy man showing interest. Odette added quietly, "Perhaps once he grows bored, things may finally return to normal." Alaric's jaw tightened. Without hesitation, he pushed the door open. The sisters froze immediately. "What exactly," asked Alaric calmly, "has Miss Valecrest done but endure cruelty from her own family?" Nobody answered. For the first time in years, shame appeared across Lady Rowena's face while Lord Cedric stared silently at the floor. Alaric's voice remained controlled, but sharp enough to cut through the room. Eudora possesses more dignity than anyone I have met within this household." Then he walked away before anyone could respond. Hours later, Eudora stood alone near the darkened garden windows when Alaric found her quietly crying. She tried hiding the tears immediately, embarrassed by her own emotions. "No one has ever defended me before," she whispered painfully. Something inside Alaric shifted hearing those words. That night, long after leaving the estate, he sat alone inside his carriage beneath the glow of a small lantern. Resting silently in his hand was a diamond engagement ring he had purchased days earlier.
The royal banquet at Kensington Hall glittered with enough wealth to blind ordinary eyes. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while orchestras played softly beneath painted ceilings covered with golden angels and clouds. Long banquet tables overflowed with roasted swan, glazed lamb, sugared fruits, wine imported from France, and towering desserts wrapped in delicate spun sugar. Diamonds flashed from every corner of the ballroom as England's highest nobility gathered beneath one roof. Eudora Valecrest had never felt more out of place. Lady Rowena had dressed her carefully in silver silk embroidered with tiny pearls, yet standing beside younger women with flawless beauty and effortless confidence made old insecurities return immediately. Every glance around the ballroom reminded Eudora of the cruel whispers she had endured for years. Too old, unwanted, forgotten. Selmira noticed her discomfort instantly and exchanged a quiet look with Callista. "He has not arrived yet," Callista whispered smugly. "Perhaps tonight she finally understands reality." Odette sipped wine silently beside them, though hope flickered across all three sisters' faces. They believed Alaric would eventually lose interest once surrounded again by younger women of higher social value. Across the ballroom, Lady Vivian Ashbourne entered wearing deep emerald velvet trimmed with diamonds resting against her throat like frozen stars. Conversations shifted immediately toward her beauty, while several women stepped aside, watching her confidently move through the crowd. Vivian clearly expected victory tonight. The moment Duke Alaric Ravenshade finally entered the banquet hall, excitement swept through the room almost violently. Noble women straightened instantly, while ambitious mothers maneuvered daughters into his path with carefully practiced smiles. Women laughed too loudly around him. Some complimented his estates, others praised his political influence. Vivian approached him personally, her expression calm with confidence built from years of admiration. But Alaric barely noticed any of them. Eudora watched quietly from near the edge of the ballroom, holding a crystal glass she had not touched once. She expected nothing of the evening except survival. Then she noticed movement across the crowd. Alaric had begun walking, slowly, purposefully.
In his hand rested a small velvet box. The music softened as whispers spread across the ballroom. Every woman nearby straightened in anticipation, while Lady Vivian's smile widened carefully. But Alaric walked past her. He continued past every celebrated beauty in the room. Then he stopped directly before Eudora. Complete silence swallowed the ballroom. Eudora stared at him, unable to breathe properly, beneath hundreds of eyes fixed upon them beneath the chandeliers. Alaric opened the velvet box slowly. Inside rested a magnificent diamond ring surrounded by pale sapphires that glittered beneath the candlelight. Then the wealthiest duke in England spoke words nobody in the room expected. "Miss Eudora Vailcrest," he said calmly, his voice carrying across the silent hall, "I have spent years surrounded by people who valued beauty, status, and wealth above character." No one moved. Alaric's eyes never left Eudora. "But you possess something far rarer than beauty. You possess kindness without selfishness, dignity without pride, and loyalty without expectation." Eudora felt tears burning immediately behind her eyes. "You treated servants with more respect than most nobles treat family," he continued softly. "You remained gentle after enduring cruelty that would have hardened many hearts." Selmira's face slowly drained of color. Callista looked completely frozen beside her. Even Lady Rowena could no longer hide the shame trembling across her expression. Then Alaric stepped closer. "And there is no woman in England I respect more than you." The ballroom remained breathlessly silent. "Eudora," he said finally, "will you do me the honor of becoming my duchess?" A broken sob escaped her before she could stop it. For several seconds, Eudora could not answer because years of humiliation, loneliness, and heartbreak crashed against her chest all at once.
Eudora,
Tears spilled openly
will
down
you do
her
me the honor
cheeks
of becoming
while
my
trembling
duchess?
hands covered her mouth.
My
Then
duchess.
she nodded through the emotion. "Yes."
What have we done?
The word barely left her lips before applause erupted across the ballroom. Lady Vivian turned away in humiliation, while whispers exploded through society within minutes. Selmira stared at her sister like a stranger. Callista lowered her eyes completely for the first time in years. Lord Cedric was stunned beyond speech, but Lady Rowena's expression carried something heavier than shock. Regret. Real regret. Years passed after that night. As Duchess of Ravenshade, Eudora became beloved throughout England, not because of her title, but because of the kindness she carried into it. She visited hospitals quietly, treated servants with warmth, remembered workers by name, and opened Ravenshade estates to struggling families during harsh winters.